Queen looked at Han Sen, then kicked towards him with her long legs like the throw of an axe. Queen did not care who her opponent was, she had no idea she was up against Dollar. But Han Sen waved his fist, and after doing so, Queen's face changed. Her legs cancelled their attack and pulled to the side in evasion. When she neared Han Sen, she raised her fist and attempted to punch him. Han Sen raised his elbow and pushed away Queen's incoming fist, as his left hand swung towards her waist. They both engaged in very close quarter combat. Their attacks, deflections, dodges, and parries came thick and fast, and the eyes of the audience could barely follow the speed at which they fought. By the time they could admire one move, another 10 had been performed. The crowd became cross-eyed, and it was like they were witnessing the fight of two rabid monsters. Who is this woman? She is so cool, she can actually go toe-to-toe with Dollar. I did not expect to ever see a woman evolver be so powerful. This woman is amazing. Her body and general appearance are divine, and her strength is incredible. She is like a goddess. This Hyun Fujing. She cannot be from the Ares Martial Hall. Many evolvers did not know who Queen was, but witnessing this fight, they quickly started to admire her. And for the people who knew Queen, they were more surprised that Dollar was able to fight her. Queen was a master of close quarter combat. She was regarded as nearly invincible by her peers, in part due to her knowledge of Heavenly Go. The combination of Heavenly Go and superb close quarter combat abilities made most fights a breeze for her. Therefore, people were surprised Dollar was able to fight Queen. The punching skills Han Sen used surprised people even more, however. Can Elephant Disc Punch beat Heavenly Go? Many people had recognized Han Sen's skill, Elephant Disc Punch. After all, it was a fairly common Hyper-Geno art. Of course, they never expected the skill could stand up to Heavenly Go. Before this day, if someone had been told Elephant Disc Punch could compete with Heavenly Go, they'd have been laughed out of the room. But there he was. Han Sen was using Elephant Disc Punch to repel Queen's Heavenly Go with no sign of being at a disadvantage. And now, people began to think Heavenly Go wasn't as effective as they had previously been led to believe. Holy crap, Dollar is using Elephant Disc Punch. I know this skill myself. Why can't I use it as good as him? Yeah, if he can use that skill to this level of effectiveness, he might as well be a god. It didn't take long for people to recognize the skill Han Sen used was Elephant Disc Punch. After all, it was very common and many people had learnt it due to the affordability of a class Hyper-Geno arts. It was frequently considered a must-have skill, but it shocked them to see Dollar cast the very same skill with such a terrifying amount of power. Dollar is Dollar. The word freaking awesome is what we can use, Tang Zhen Liu said in praise. Queen was shocked just as much. She knew exactly what kind of skill Elephant Disc Punch was, despite not having learnt it herself. She was shocked to see her opponent using such a regular skill and still keeping up with her. But Queen was Queen, and she didn't let the surprise put her at a disadvantage. She didn't care about which skill he used against her. All she wanted to do was win. This fight was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. This is good. So, after all this time, humanity hasn't been resting on its laurels. The younger generation has followed in the footsteps of their predecessors, taking the abilities of their forefathers forward with greater strength. Fan Minkwon was excited to see this as well. He didn't know such a powerful female existed, and that she could do so well in combat against Dollar. His fists were like an elephant and hers were like a battle axe. Han Sen knew he could not beat her if he maintained this status quo. The best he could hope for right now was Queen exhausting all her energy. If he fought for his life, Han Sen might win. But he didn't want to kill her, nor did he want to spend too much energy. So, Han Sen suddenly stopped. He let Queen's battle axe leg, which was currently being driven at his head, carry on its approach and did not dodge. Everyone was shocked. They had no idea why Dollar just stopped fighting all of a sudden. They believed, if he accepted the strike that was coming his way, he'd end up half dead. Everyone thought Dollar might have had a trump card up his sleeve, but he didn't. Queen's leg struck Han Sen's head without resistance. But what happened next dropped every jaw in the vicinity. Although Queen's strike hit Dollar's head with startling velocity and pitch-perfect aim, he didn't move. Dollar did not move a single inch. It was like Queen had whacked a statue, not a human body. But with Queen's power, even if Dollar was a statue, he'd be nothing but rubble right now. And still, Han Sen stood upright as if Queen had not even touched him. Impossible. Tang Zhen Liu stood up, and with wide eyes, peered at Dollar who had just stood there in acceptance of the kick. It was not just Tang Zhen Liu bearing such a reaction. Everyone who knew even the slightest thing about Queen and her power could not believe what had just happened. Queen's power was above all other evolvers, it was commonly believed. It was hard to imagine how tough a person would have to be to withstand one of her strikes and not even budge. And Queen herself was just as shocked. But still, she did not let that be cause for refrain. Her pair of beautiful legs went back to kicking Han Sen like two fierce dragons, and again, she was unopposed. She hit Han Sen heavily, over and over. Queen kept on kicking, striking, and hitting. Her leg skills left no room for retaliation. Had Dollar sought to pull a stunt, the legs just came at him in a ceaseless barrage from every angle. The crowd was frozen at the sight, at how none of Queen's attacks made Han Sen move a single inch. The entire shelter was quiet. Even the other human fighters who had joined Divinity's bout were in awe. The raging sound of the kicks echoed far and wide across the battlegrounds, but Dollar's strong purple body continued to stand still, as if Queen's hurricane of attacks was nothing more than a stiff breeze. Queen, who always did what she wanted and achieved the results she desired, suddenly started to look a little panicky. Dong! Queen kicked towards Han Sen's face, but then stopped right before it landed. Everyone looked at the two. Dollar did not move. All he did was raise his right hand slowly. He grabbed Queen's lower leg, and she was unable to move it anymore. "Have you kicked me enough yet? Can we end this now?" Han Sen asked gently as he held onto Queen's calf. Everyone who heard this was struck with a strange feeling, and the atmosphere changed. It no longer looked like a fight on a battleground. Queen now looked like a little girl who had been throwing a tantrum to her father. Dollar was the father who allowed her to let it all out before taking her home. Although it was inappropriate, that was how people viewed the scene after hearing Dollar speak. The cold and powerful Queen was little more than a sulking little girl now. Queen took notice of this strange atmosphere as well. She gritted her teeth and lifted her other leg. She twirled in the air and kicked Han Sen. Han Sen did not care for the other kicking leg, and he allowed it to strike his neck. He stepped forward, reached out his hands, and grabbed a hold of Queen's waist as she was in the air. Then, he lifted her up on his side like a little girl and walked to the edge of the battleground. No matter how many times Queen kicked, Han Sen did not care. He just continued his walk to the side of the battleground. Everyone thought their eyes were playing tricks. No one could have expected a person as calm and composed as Queen to take part in such a juvenile scene. The father and daughter feelings only continued to grow. Queen was the tantrum-throwing girl while Dollar was the understanding father. He did not argue with the little girl. He only allowed her to release the anger she had pent up inside her. Somehow, a phrase popped into many people's heads, a father's love. Everyone looked puzzled, the people from the Ares Martial Hall, in particular. Their mouths continued to remain open, not seeming likely to close anytime soon. Queen's heart was stricken with anger and embarrassment. She never thought she would be treated like this, and she would have preferred to be killed. But at the same time, Queen was shocked. She was aware of the extent of her own power, and she knew there were only two possible explanations for Han Sen's ability to withstand her attacks. Firstly, his armor must have been incredibly hard to survive her barrage of kicks. She struggled to imagine what sort of armor he possessed, if it was indeed that tough. It was either that, or he was just much stronger than her. The strength of his armor would not matter too much if their powers had been on a similar level. A lot of the educated spectators could see this, and it made them even more surprised than the evolvers. Queen had already maxed out her sacred Geno points. She also had the best hyper Geno arts. Her power was way above the limits of most normal evolvers, and yet she could not do anything. Those watching could not believe or even fathom how powerful Dollar might have been. Super Geno points. He must have absorbed Super Geno points. Otherwise, he could not be that powerful. These thoughts ran through the minds of many people. The first God's Sanctuary and second God's Sanctuary had people who had killed super creatures and obtained their life Geno essences. But up until now, a method of absorbing the essences and gaining super Geno points had yet to be discovered. The only explanation for Dollar's performance was that he had managed to do what others thought impossible. In the silence that now enveloped the arena, Han Sen had reached the edge of the battleground. He threw her off the stage. "Go home and stop wasting your time. I am not here to fight humans," Han Sen coldly told her. As he said this, it was like everyone stopped breathing. "I am not here to fight humans." It was an average sentence, but still, it made people unable to breathe. The blood of the audience began to boil in excitement. In addition to his supreme fitness level, Han Sen wore Berserk super armor. He also simulated the Cub's energy flow to make his body not far off the strength of obsidian. That was how he managed to shrug off Queen's attacks. If he had not simulated that energy, the armor itself would not have been enough. After all, Queen knew how to make use of yin force, and no armor could withstand all that power. "It looks like my absorption of life Geno essences is going to be exposed." Han Sen had known exposure would be inevitable when he went up against the final spirit. But he hadn't counted on meeting Queen and having it revealed so early. But Han Sen was prepared for the world to know, anyway. He was playing the role of the enigmatic dollar, and no one would be able to find him once the matches were over. In the next 2 fights, he met humans again. When his would-be opponents walked on stage, however, they did not fight him. "Dollar, I am a fan of yours. Can I have your signature?" A 2-meter-tall big man stood in front of Han Sen looking shy, and handed over a pen and paper. Han Sen froze for a second, expecting another match. He didn't expect someone who had come so far to give up the fight and instead ask for a signature. He took the pen and paper and scribbled his name down. He was not worried about someone recognizing his handwriting. He could control his body well enough to mask his handwriting, so he used a style no one would be able to trace back to him. Thank you. The big man greatly appreciated his autograph and then quickly exited the stage. The second human opponent was not as fanatical as the other man, fortunately. He did tell Han Sen something, though. He said, "Good luck, Dollar. You have our support. Go and become a son of God." Then, he also gave up the fight and exited the stage. The last opponent of the day was a royal spirit. Han Sen killed it with a single blow, which made humanity super happy. Han Sen did not stay for long afterwards. He quickly made his leave and returned to the privacy of the Crystal Palace. Dollar's words lingered on the minds of many, but they particularly stood out to Fang Mingquan. "I am not here to fight humans." Returning to the office, Fang Mingquan wrote an article called, "I am not here to fight humans, the King's Declaration," and posted it. It described Dollar's fights over the previous 2 days. He made sure to highlight Dollar's most profound line. In the end, Fang Mingquan wrote, "The king has returned, his sword directed to the position of becoming a son of God. Will Dollar become humanity's first son of God?" The day held unparalleled fervor and excitement. They were hopeful for Dollar's performance in the future, hoping he would stand as a representation for humanity's position amongst the Son of Gods. But the real shock came from the Alliance's office. Normal people only understood he was strong. They didn't quite grasp the full extent of his strength like others might have. The high-class officers of the Alliance were aware Dollar must have absorbed life geno-essences. They also knew he was wearing a super beast soul armor. If he wasn't, they knew he couldn't possibly have possessed such insane defense. Even Queen could do nothing before him, and as a result, they were certain this was so. A lot of people were excited and curious about this development. They were almost salivating at the prospect of Dollar proving that humans could indeed absorb life geno-essences. Their inquisitiveness of how he had done so was difficult to temper. A lot of people wanted to find out, but they did not know how to get in contact with the elusive Dollar. Many people analyzed the information they had on Dollar in an attempt to predict who Dollar might be. They composed a list of suspects, one which contained the name Han Sen. But Han Sen and Dollar had appeared in the same area many times, as well as at different locations at the same time. This led to his name being crossed from the list. Not many people owned a doppelganger beast soul. People only knew Han Sen and Ning Yu had one, so no one considered this possibility. Ning Yu was there watching Divinity's bout as well. This made him think of something. Not being wholly certain, he didn't let people know what he was thinking of just yet. The Aqua Reaper lived inside him, and his thoughts and life were in Han Sen's hands. If he did something to displease Han Sen, he'd be a dead man. Over 80% of human evolvers were focused on Divinity's bout for the first time. The media began reporting as much as they could on the event. Most reports were about Dollar, his past, present, and possible future legacies. Overnight, Dollar became a legendary figure to the entire Alliance. His name was on the tip of everyone's tongue. The fame he received was different than what he received in the past. This time, Dollar was shouldering the glory of all humanity. Made-up stories said he could walk around the day he was born. He could fight when he was merely 1 year old and admire women with big boobies by the time he was 3. Others were firm in the belief that Dollar had volunteered for some super geno-engineering. They believed the genes of his composition had been modified, enabling the supreme power he wielded. Everyone had their own story, and all manner of false rumors and tall tales had begun to spread. Many articles and books had been released, some unabashedly false, such as The Secrets Between Me and Dollar or Trapped in an Elevator with Dollar. Such stories became quite popular. The officers and factions of the Alliance worked tirelessly to figure out who Dollar was, but still, they could not find out. People like Hua Ping had painstakingly analyzed the potential outcome of the next fight, with the data collected from Light Son of Gods and Han Sen's previous fights. He had come to the conclusion that Han Sen had only a 20% chance of winning. Hua Ping and his people had been predicting this outcome for a while now, even before Dollar's popularity exploded. They hoped to find a way Dollar might manage to beat his ultimate enemy. But in each one of Light Son of God's battles, he killed everything that came close. No one had managed to last longer than a second after a bout started with him, and standing before him seemed to be a guaranteed death. His movement speed was far too quick even to see. The reason Hua Ping believed Han Sen still had a 20% chance of winning was attributed to his armor. With good fortune, such sturdy armor might be what was needed to survive one of Light Son of God's killing strikes. While blocking his attack did not guarantee a win, it still provided an opening. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance nonetheless. All the big factions of the alliance conducted their own analyses, but each one's result was considerably worse than Hua Ping's prediction. They saw Han Sen having less than 10% chance of achieving victory. Compared to these high-class sorts, however, the general populace was overall more hopeful and optimistic. It was almost expected that Dollar would become a son of God, and they spent little time dwelling on the alternative outcomes for his final fight. Han Sen himself tried not to pay much attention, but it was a popular topic that was making headlines everywhere he looked. He read a few articles out of curiosity, which revealed to him who he would be fighting. Han Sen read one of Fang Mingquan's articles. It was a report that quoted Hua Ping's prediction of success and the reasons why, which gave Han Sen some sort of idea of what he should expect. A speedy spirit. That could be difficult. Han Sen frowned. He was afraid of encountering speedy spirits, particularly those who would also be stronger than him. It was the worst of both worlds, and wielding such power with that terrifying speed really would make Han Sen an easy kill. Han Sen's thoughts aligned with Hua Ping's. He had to hope his armor was sturdy enough to withstand the attacks of Light Son of God. That would be his window. I have Berserk super armor. Even if he is a super spirit, I should be able to block it, right? Han Sen was deep in thought, and he continued, if he is fast, then that means he will be weaker physically. Heavy punches always hit harder than fast ones. If you had brought your pet to fight alongside you, all this glory might have been yours. Annie approached Han Sen, supper in hand. She sat in front of him as he read the news while he ate. Han Sen smiled and said, I would have liked to, but I don't have super armor. I don't have defense like him. And I don't even have the ability to absorb life geno essences like this guy. Either. My fitness would be too low. In such a small arena, a super spirit could gleefully ignore my pet and come for me right away. There'd be no room for me to maneuver and exclusively sick my pet on my opponent. You are right, but that Dollar's fitness is still lower than the super spirits. Even with super armor, he is still useless. He will not be able to hit Light Son of God, and so he will still lose. Annie took a breath and then continued to say, if your pet is with him, it might give him the edge he needs to become one of the 10 Son of Gods. Even if I wanted to lend the pet to Dollar, where could I find him? All of the factions are looking for him like mad, right now. Han Sen shrugged. Annie nodded and said, we have run many tests on the life geno essences. We have no idea how to absorb them, yet Dollar has somehow managed to. I would like to know how, too, Han Sen said, as he continued to eat. The next day, the human shelter's battleground was packed to the gills with spectators once more. The audience was rabid, eager to watch Dollar fight the Light Son of God. If Dollar won, he would become a son of God himself. It would be the ultimate glory and one of the highest achievements of humanity. A lot of old evolvers also entered the battle arena earlier than most. Quietly, they waited for the matches to start. Their hearts were nervous, and no one wanted Dollar to win more than they did. From 20-year-old people to 200-year-old people, this fight was a cultural phenomenon. It attracted people of all ages, from all walks of life. It was unknown how many billions of human evolvers now turned their attention to this fight. Even those who said Dollar had no chance of winning still prayed he might be able to summon a miracle. This was nothing personal. Although Han Sen personally felt that it was, he was representing the entire human race. Until Han Sen, no human had ever come this far. He was a genuine pioneer for humankind, and he shouldered the expectations of countless people. This was his glory. He's here. A strong purple body stepped forward to enter the arena. The anxiety that tempered the mood of the crowd was suddenly loosed into a blazing flare of excitement. A lot of people had read the analyses of Light Son of God. He was a terribly strong foe for anyone to encounter. As such, they were slightly worried Dollar would have been a no-show. He had long white hair to skirt his cold, handsome face. He wore a white robe hemmed with gold, and he approached like the son of God he was. The whole world seemed humbled by his mere presence. Everyone watched the Light Son of God come on stage, and they all froze with bated breath. His oppressive presence made it difficult for the audience to look at him straight. To look at him felt like blasphemy. So handsome, a woman could not help but blurt out. He looked so holy, even a woman from a different race couldn't help but find him attractive. Compared to humanity, the light son of God was like a perfect being. He stood casually, yet he emitted a holy aura that belittled everyone else who looked at him. The light son of God was of a similar height to Han Sen, but from the way he stood, he looked taller. It was as if he was looking down on Dollar. His eyes were full of disdain, as if Han Sen's worth was less than that of an ant. The evolvers who watched felt suffocated. It was like a mound of rocks was slowly being built upon their chests, and they wanted to heave blood out of their mouths. God said, "Let there be light." These words exited light son of God's mouth. His white eyes shone, as if to embody the God he spoke about. He said these words before every single fight. It wasn't anything personal uttered towards Han Sen, because he looked at everyone the same way. He considered everyone he opposed as nothing. With his angelic voice, light son of God raised his index finger. It was thin, long, and perfectly chiseled. It pointed towards Han Sen. A white beam suddenly formed in the air and pinged off Han Sen's forehead. Before he had the chance to react, Han Sen looked as if he had been sniped with a perfect headshot. His body leaned backwards after the shot, and he crumbled like a castle to the ground, the momentum catching up and sliding him a good distance back. The humans who watched the fight fell silent and suddenly felt terrible. Dollar could not even withstand a ranged attack that came from Light Son of God's finger. The people who had researched Light Son of God bore wry smiles as they shook their heads. They knew this was going to happen, but still, they couldn't help but feel bad. The Light Son of God's attacks were too fast, and humans had no chance of dodging the white beams emitted from his fingers. Suddenly, Dollar's collapsed body moved. He pulled himself back to his feet and touched his head. His dark purple helmet had a circular indentation in it. It was almost like a bullet hole, but it didn't pierce all the way through. People yelled with reinvigorated joy. They couldn't put into words their sudden relief, and all they could do was chant his name in unison. Han Sen's forehead lit up with pain. He had already cast the Ant King's energy flow to boost his defense inside his Berserk Ant King armor, and still, Light Son of God's attack had almost pierced right through. His foe was stronger than he had imagined, and he most certainly believed he was a super spirit. He was most likely stronger than a super creature. Light Son of God's power was indeed at the level of a super creature, but his wisdom far exceeded theirs. When Light Son of God lifted his finger earlier, Han Sen could not even see the beam's trail. Without seeing it coming, he could not react to it. Before he noticed it was firing at his forehead, it was too late. Light Son of God saw Han Sen survive his beam attack, and was surprised that Han Sen's head was not blown off. He raised his lips and mockingly said, "Not bad. To not be killed by my beam, your life must have many accomplishments. If I can kill you, that'll just be another one to the tally." Han Sen shook his head. The beam was incredibly powerful. Although his helmet blocked it, his head still suffered a concussion. His neck was in pain as well, most likely suffering whiplash from the sudden impact. Light Son of God had a disdainful smile and he said, "Ignorant human, that first hit was only a drop from the well of my power. Do you really think you have what it takes to compete against me? Yes, for if that was any indication, you must have a pretty small well." After that, Han Sen ran towards Light Son of God with his fist raised. But after Han Sen's first step, Light Son of God pointed his finger at him again. The white beam managed to strike Han Sen's head once more. Blood dripped from beneath his helmet. Everyone was shocked, the blood telling them that things weren't going too well. Too strong. This is not something mere evolvers can go up against. With such speed and power, there is no way he can win. A lot of people had similar thoughts as the audience's faces went pale. Although the Light Son of God was not going after them, they still felt hopeless after watching his dominating power. The dark purple body stood up once more. The helmet had another bullet hole in it, and this time it had pierced all the way through, causing blood to leak from the hit. It was a terrifying sight. "Is that all you got?" Han Sen stared at the Light Son of God, as the blood in his body pumped faster to the accompaniment of his heart. Han Sen felt no fear, only excitement. He saw the glimmer of hope, the one that would guide him to defeat the Light Son of God. The Light Son of God's attacks did not heavily damage him. Even though the beam pierced through his armor, the power was not enough to damage his gargoyle glyph body. He had cast the bear cub's energy flow to strengthen his body even more. Han Sen's greatest disadvantage right now was the fact he was using Dongshuan Sutra to cast a number of different energy flows at once. He couldn't fight much longer, so he had to find a way to end the battle soon. He could not risk collapsing from exhaustion. He stepped forward with another look of certainty. He raised his fist again with the intent of hitting the Light Son of God. The Light Son of God's face looked ugly, almost as if he was mad. 5 fingers now pointed at Han Sen, and another 5 beams of light pierced through Han Sen's body. A few sensitive female spectators held their mouths as tears fell from their eyes. With more blood seeping through his wounds and the tears of his armor, Han Sen managed to stand up once again. He didn't say anything this time, he just tried to punch Light Son of God again. Light Son of God's eyes went cold as he fired another 5 beams of light. Han Sen tried to evade them, but the beams really were too quick. He could not dodge them, and again 5 more bloody holes appeared in his armor. But this time, Han Sen did not fall. His legs carved 2 deep marks into the hard floor of the arena. Han Sen used his hands to maintain his grip and not fall over. Although things looked dire, he didn't fall. Blood continued to drip. Seeing Han Sen still managing to stand up, the chests of many people felt heavy with sunken emotions. When the Light Son of God looked at Han Sen again, there was no longer disdain in his expression. Instead, he looked at Han Sen with respect. He considered the dollar he was up against to be a genuine opponent. Now, I will treat you like a real foe. You can quit now if you'd like. If you choose not to, understand I will not allow you to live, the Light Son of God offered, continuing to look at Han Sen. Han Sen did not answer. He just raised his fist to try to punch him again. The Light Son of God's body finally moved. His entire body became light, and he teleported in front of Han Sen. Several beams of light were cast, which stitched together to strike Han Sen. Han Sen's body was smacked into the air as more and more blood began to pour from inside the dark purple armor like a red peony. Pang! Han Sen's body crashed down onto the ground with a heavy thud. Not a single sound came from the audience that looked on, as the Light Son of God's power shocked them all. But in their hearts the faint flame of hope was yet to be fully extinguished. Stand up. People chanted this line in their hearts but did not dare shout it out loud. They felt their hopes were pitiable, and nothing more than false hopes. They thought it was like trying to light a match in a typhoon. They hoped the match could continue to burn, but they feared if they said something, its fire would go out. Even though they did not speak, however, they still understood its futility. The wind itself was what would extinguish a match that was lit inside a typhoon. But Han Sen was not a little flame. He stood up. A few cracks delicately traced and adorned his armor, blood seeping through them. Despite his wounds, he stood up straight in defiance. He waved his fist towards the Light Son of God again. The Light Son of God snorted and moved. The beams of light were cast again and they all struck Han Sen's body, which summoned even more spilt blood. Han Sen did try to dodge it, but again, his foe was too fast. He could not see the attacks, and as a result, could not evade. He was repeatedly knocked down, but he never stayed there. Every time he was knocked down, he got up again. His armor was coated with a vast number of marks. His dark purple armor was now dyed red in his blood. Stop fighting, give up. A woman cried out with a soft voice. She tried to hold it in, but no longer could. With a voice that was as soft as a prayer, she pleaded. She did not want to see Dollar suffer a slow, brutal death. Han Sen could not hear her voice, and even if he had, he would not care. He looked far worse than he actually felt. If it was ordinary armor he was using, he would have been killed far sooner. Under the constant attacks, the armor would have broken a long time ago. The Devil Ant King armor had very strong recovery abilities, however. Han Sen simulated the Ant King's energy flow, which allowed it to absorb the damage that was being dealt and not wholly break. The damage he had taken earlier was healed before he suffered the latest hit. This was what allowed Han Sen to pick himself up again and again. Without the protection of the Ant King armor, he would have been shredded into nothing but bits. Han Sen, who had been beaten down again, stood up once more. He raised his fist but could never get close enough to the Light Son of God to even touch the cloth of his garment. Han Sen wasn't being reckless, but the Light Son of God was too fast and he simply could not follow. If he hadn't been able to sustain the attacks, then his inability to defeat the spirit would have been assured. Han Sen needed to get a grip on the Light Son of God's attack pattern. If he could just touch him, he might have what it took to beat him. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.